Hello, bonjour, and oki to everyone, and welcome to Nonprofits at 2. I'm Karen Ball, Interim President and CEO of CCVO. Thank you for joining us. Even though we can't meet in person, it's great to see such interest in today's conversation. We're joined today by 150 members and guests from Calgary, Alberta, and Canada. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the place where we at CCVO are fortunate to call home. We honor and acknowledge the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina and Nakota nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. As a settler and an ally, I am proud to call Mohkinstsis home. We're all treaty people. In this Nonprofit at 2 gathering, we'll hear about the shifting trends in corporate investment directly from those on the front lines of designing and directing significant private investment into our nonprofit sector. I've had the chance to hear these panelists discuss the topics that will be addressed today, and I found their insight and perspective to be incredibly interesting. I know we're in for a real treat. A sincere thank you to the supporters of Nonprofits at 2 who make these gatherings possible. Today's event is presented by CIBC and supported by the Muttart Foundation, PwC Canada, and Suncor Energy Foundation. I'd also like to recognize and thank our media partner, Postmedia. Before I introduce our moderator and panel, a few points about today's gathering. At the panel discussion, you'll be able to submit questions for the live question and answer portion at the end of the event. You'll also have a chance to answer a few short questions about your experience today. We hope you'll take time to complete the short survey and share your thoughts with us so that we can ensure that Nonprofits at 2 remains relevant and responsive to your interests and needs. I'm excited to introduce our guests, starting with our moderator, Lori Hewson, Director of Community Investment and Social Innovation at Suncor Energy Foundation and Suncor Energy. If you have the pleasure of knowing Lori, which many of you likely do, then you'll know firsthand that she's an inspirational leader in the field of social innovation who's had an indelible impact on the direction and investment of Suncor Energy and the Suncor Energy Foundation for over the past 16 years. Welcome, Lori. Joining her today are Jeff Sear, Managing Partner with Raven Indigenous Capital and an Ashoka Fellow. Jeff has provided strategic leadership for Indigenous, nonprofit, and government organizations for over 20 years. He's active in the social innovation and social finance space and was recently selected as a 2019 Ashoka Fellow. Raven Indigenous Capital Partners uses impact investing and storytelling and strong relationships in the Indigenous community to support a re-emerging Indigenous economy. Welcome, Jeff. Elizabeth Pottingstar, Manager of Corporate Giving with CIBC. Elizabeth holds responsibility for all aspects of community investment for CIBC. She has a background in fund development within the arts and healthcare sectors and is a CFRE and holds a graduate degrees from both the University of Toronto and Queen's, I think. Is that correct? Welcome, Elizabeth. James Temple, Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer, PwC Canada. James leads a team that brings PwC's purpose to life in the marketplace through working with the firm's people, clients, and communities to co-design solutions that address society's biggest challenges while upskilling people and creating economic value for business. I love that description. He's on the board of the Philanthropic Foundations of Canada and is a member of the Risk Oversight and Governance Board at CPA Canada. Welcome, James, and thank you all for joining us today. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the current and future landscape of community investment. And I'm now going to hand things over to Lori to get the conversation started.
Great. Thanks so much, Karen. It's a joy to be with all of you today. We were just chatting before we joined the call. It's a very snowy day here in Calgary and I think parts of Alberta. So our guests are in sunnier, warmer, maybe a little rainier Ontario, but they're in empathy for those of us who are enjoying an early winter. Anyway, Karen's done a lovely job of introducing us in terms of what we do, and thought we'd take a chance to talk a little bit, introduce ourselves a little bit around who we are. And so I'll start. I am a partner to Louis and a stepmom to his three amazing daughters, young women who are all in university. We miss them terribly. They're all at university in the UK, and we haven't seen them in far too long. And I'm also a daughter, a sister, and aunt, and this is who I am. I was born and raised on these Treaty 7 lands. It's a place I feel a deep connection to, but my ancestors do come from away, and so I'm very mindful of what that means too for my place on this landscape. I am going to hand it over to Elizabeth to say a little bit more about who she is, and then we'll go to James and to Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth. I am in rainy Port Credit right now in Mississauga. I was earlier bragging that it's not snowing and it's not 2 degrees here. We are getting 22 on Friday, but yeah, I don't think that's going to last very long. So hi, everybody. I am a proud wife of Jason and proud dog mom of Hartley, and I have job experience in both fundraising and now on what we call the other side, corporate development and corporate giving. And I'm so thrilled and honored to have experience on both sides of this wonderful world of corporate giving and charitable practices. So thank you so much for having me today.
And I'm James Temple. I'm proudly GLBT. I grew up in a farm town in rural Ontario, and hopefully continue to try to make it in the big city, and have spent my entire career helping bring a voice to those who haven't necessarily had an opportunity to have theirs amplified. And I think conversations like this and with all of you on the panel today really inspire me to continue to do that work. So thank you for the opportunity to be a part of it.
Over to me, I suppose. Tanshi Ani Bojo. My name is Jeff Sear. I am a proud father of 5 and husband to Nicole. I hail from my traditional territory is in the Buffalo Hunt staging grounds of southern Manitoba, which I still consider home, even though I now live in unceded Algonquin territory here in Ottawa. I am the managing partner for Raven Capital, as you know, but spent a career both in private business, public and not-for-profits, leading the National Association of Friendship Centers for 6 years, as well as being a negotiator and a policy advisor in Privy Council and PMO for quite a while. So that's who I am. So thanks for inviting me.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I want to take a couple minutes to kind of ground us in the conversation today. It's really kind of grounding us in the uncertainty of this time, with a quote from somebody who I'm enjoying reading a lot of these days, Dr. Martin Shaw, who, when asked in an interview earlier this year about what his prediction for the future is, responded by saying that despite 20 years of being a wilderness mythic guide, I have nothing more to say for another year. It's too premature to have any sense of how it will unfold. And I often find myself in a space of wanting to figure things out, seeking certainty, especially when I can't make sense of what's going on around me. I go back to this quote regularly to remind myself that sometimes I just have to feel my way through these times of uncertainty, relying on the knowledge and skills that I've gained to this point, and also the knowledge and skills of others. I think we could probably all agree that we're in fundamentally different times, and it's going to change how we exist and relate to one another going forward. And so these are the things that are on my mind and were on my mind when I said yes to the invitation to be with you all today as moderating this panel. And so that's really what some of this conversation today is going to be about. And we have these 3 amazing panelists who have depth of experience and knowledge who are going to share what they've experienced with us. We also have all of you on the call with your own experience and knowledge. And one of the things that are somewhat regretful about this time is that we're not in a room together to be in a discussion together, but we're going to make the best use of this kind of virtual space together to do that. So, because I know together we can navigate these times, and the things that we all know, if we put it together in a bundle or in a pot, that will serve us well going forward together. So with that in mind, I want to remind all of us that what's being shared and discussed today is based on a point in time, and it's limited to what we know today. Such a highly dynamic environment that we find ourselves in, and I think what we learned together today will help all of us on the journey ahead. In terms of the format, the information that's being shared with you are from the perspectives, it's being shared from the perspective of corporate community investment, philanthropy, social impact investing, and entrepreneurship. There's quite a breadth of approaches in terms of how we invest in community, and there's probably way more to this than we even know at this moment. I have the privilege of asking the panelists a few questions. We have 3 questions. We're going to spend about 35-40 minutes doing that. And then we're going to look forward to opening it up to take questions from all of you who are joining us on the call, and we'll take about 40 to 45 minutes to do that. So I encourage you all to please submit your questions to the question box, as Karen mentioned earlier. I'll try to do my best to keep reminding folks of that, but I'm sure that you probably have lots of things to say, and not just questions, but comments. It would be great to hear what you're thinking about too, and if you can contribute that to this discussion, then we would really appreciate that. And so, without further ado, 3 questions. Each panelist is going to have a chance to respond to the questions. We'll go one at a time, and I think we'll go in order, and I'll maybe just change the sequence occasionally, but Elizabeth, if we start with you first, then go to James, and then to Jeff. And so the first question that I would love for you to share your reflections on with everyone are, what has the pandemic changed or opened up for you in terms of your strategy and your approach to investment? So in other words, if I tries to probe a little bit more deeply, so I'll give you the other probing questions now to help. Have you needed to balance, has there been a need to balance just a responsive mode while also kind of hanging on to your long-term view or strategy? Do you need to pivot on any of those initiatives or plans as you go forward? So Elizabeth, I'll let you respond, and then we'll go to James.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of words to say to that. I think we've all heard those same words, the reimagined, flexible, pivoting, going virtual. I mean, across the board, we've all had to make these really important changes in order to stay inclusive and accessible to Canadians across the country. And certainly when we think about how we've changed and what's happened, it's been about pivoting, and it's been about being flexible and offering our partners unrestricted funding, giving them reassurance that we are here for them. Like this is, you know, it's something none of us have ever been through, and hopefully we will come out on the other side. But we want those to know that CIBC is there for them. We're flexible. We are here for whatever you need, both our team and our vast network of employees who are so committed to their volunteering. But we also want to make sure that our response remains authentic to who we are as a bank. You know, we can't do everything and anything for everyone. We want to make sure that what we're doing is who we are and authentic to what we can do. And we're, of course, open always to hearing new ideas about how we can support the communities in which we work and live.
I thought as well that, you know, the agility that not-for-profit leaders on the call have shown over the past 8 months has been remarkable. When we think about the $15+ billion revenue gap that many of you on the call will know, and that's an Reimagined Canada stat, I think what has been most interesting that we've seen at PwC are not-for-profits that have mobilized, stabilized, and strategized through the pandemic. So working in consultation with boards to upskill on cash flow management, scenario planning, engaging in conversations around their theories of change and the value that they want to create and they want to achieve by doing work differently. Now, we know, and we like to say new world, new skills at PwC on how the world's changing around us. This moment provides a great opportunity for not-for-profits to lead. So I take a more positive outlook on the challenges around us to say we can choose to navigate negatively through complexity. I'm confident, and I know PwC is confident, that by thinking about the skills required to navigate and build resilience through the pandemic and what's next, we're going to have a stronger, more vibrant sector. So I think nuanced through some of the conversation today, you'll hear my thoughts on some ideas around that as well.
Perfect. So James is a great place to lead off with some comments from our perspective. And just to put it in perspective, we provide private equity investments into Indigenous social enterprises, and on the other side, we do sort of community level social finance. So that's the perspective by which I approach it. I think the first thing that I would do is make a comment about the pandemic, about where we are at this point in time, and what we know, and as you pointed out, Lori, exactly what we don't know in the stage we're at. So the way that we look at it is we had an emergency situation come February, March, and what I would say is a pretty significant response by government agencies globally at different speeds, and we can criticize that if we like, but there's been a very significant response, and there's been a sort of a tucking into debt-based spending by national governments, and you know, at least the concept to alleviate some of the pain on the ground for not-for-profits, for-profits, and charitable organizations, all in the mix at different levels. But we're kind of in a second phase. We're facing a wave 2 of COVID, and wave 2 is really starting to press on the resiliency buttons. Those who've extended cash flows and have done some of that management, thinned out their operational expenses, have coming to the point now, I think, where tougher decisions need to be made, and they're looking for, you know, debt-based and equity-based capital to help them through that phase. The third phase, I think, that will come is people called it building back better. I called it more of a resiliency phase, where we're now starting to look deeper at business models and not-for-profit models and charitable models, as well as we do a little advisory work in that space about what exactly does it mean. I'm going to just take another minute here, Lori. I mean, there are certain changes that we think are likely to have a permanency to them. I don't think you're going to see quite the return to the office environment. I don't think you're going to see quite a return to the level and size of public events, and I would say revenue from events, and also the convening function that has often happened in charitable not-for-profit sector. But in terms of the impact on what we do, our first step in looking at it is a holistic look at the businesses that we deal with. And the first thing we start to really do is, you know, if you produce things, we look at your supply side, which really did get impacted on the first wave, has leveled out a little bit now. And then, of course, there are certain industries that just can't come back in any realistic way. Tourism, hospitality, even levels of commercial, retail, real estate, and retail in particular has a murky future if you're not really e-commerce enabled. So we look at that with the businesses. We look at cash flow, as James said. How do we protect those businesses that we have? How do we help them navigate and make smart decisions? So I know that was a bit of a long-winded response, but I thought I would get that out there.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Stefan, for naming those things as well, because it's I think our predisposition is to try and solve problems and fix things, and we also seem to want to hang on to the way things have been for very good reason. And so it's not always difficult to stare in the face of those things that are changing that we all hold so dear. So thanks for naming those. I forgot to mention at the very top of all this, and I did mention it to the organizers, that I've been having computer issues the last couple of weeks, or not last, or rather the last couple of days. And so if I weirdly disappear on you all at some point, know that Karen is prepared to step in. And I say that only because I started to get the weird flickering, you know, again on my computer. So my apologies if I disappear. Or if I get momentarily distracted by things that are going on here. I am just going to go to the second question. And I would say too that at any point in time to the panelists, if you have questions for one another, points that you want to clarify or dig into a little bit, then please say so. Second question, and James, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Jeff and Elizabeth. And Jeff touched on it a little bit, but you know, in terms of the changes that we're seeing in society, what is that meaning for you as investors, community investment in professionals, or just investors in community? Is this changing how or what you invest in? Is it influencing how you're making funding decisions to help address some of these issues?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, so much is going on in the world when we reflect on the well-being of people, the health and safety of those around us, social justice movements, coalition building around climate change and the environment. There are significant and complex issues around us, and corporations have a long way to go. And coming from a place of humility, my observation around the community investment sector is that many are taking an important step back to think, reflect, work directly with community and those with lived experience and who have ongoing opportunity gaps, specifically those who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic and social inequity, to really ask more important and thoughtful questions around what and how can investment support the ongoing development and sustainability of the community as you define it. And I think that that's an important change that we're seeing in terms of funder communities. I think second to that, and if I pivot towards not-for-profits in a structural sense, and as Jeff said, tough choices are ahead. So as organizational boards and leadership teams reflect on their social mission and the work that they're doing to keep their people safe and to make a difference with their clients and their social services, how do we have more fearless conversations around how and what an organization might look like as the pandemic continues? So whether those are more difficult conversations and involve a wind down or coalition building or collaborative models with different entities, how do we build the confidence to have those conversations with boards and management teams and, you know, really upskill around the capabilities required to take the lead? Again, whether that involves changing an organization altogether or rethinking a mission or trying something new with an issue that may appear as a result of the pandemic and as an opportunity to grow and develop. What I would say in ending is we're seeing a lot more grassroots organizations come together specifically around social justice, which I find very heartening around public discourse and civic engagement in these conversations. And I hope something that we'll see continue and expedite as we all get through this together.
Yeah, so wow, James gives me lots to think about too. So I think I would answer the question in a variety of ways. The first I would say is that the combination of the pandemic and social justice issues emerging out of Black Lives Matter and BIPOC type movements and social exclusion and, you know, systemic racial injustice, including in the finance and the corporate sector and other places, has really, they've kind of converged within this moment in time. And this has both, and I'm optimistic and hopeful about it, and I think it provides an opportunity as well in that space. So let me talk about the real point of the question was, does it change how we invest? And the first answer is absolutely, it changes how we invest and look at things. You know, from a hardcore investment perspective, I mean, we are a social impact investor as a starting point. So we always look at, you know, what's the straight line between our community upliftment and this investment that we're making in this business or whoever it is. So we really look for impact, and we really encourage others to look at impact and to look at their numbers and find ways to sort of quantify and qualify the impact that they're having as an organization. So a piece of advice I would say to many organizations. On one side of the, so in terms of a business perspective, the investment changes is I'm probably not going to invest too actively in an ecotourism play today, whereas I might have 10 months ago. That it's just, you know, you need to look at the market, you need to understand it, and I'd say you need to do that as a charity or not-for-profit as well. On a broader scale, I have seen in the last 5 months, 4 months maybe, an extreme uptick in interest from large pools of private capital into diversity and inclusion, and including in our funds and what we disperse, and I mean significant US-based, European-based capital, which far outstrips what Canada has to provide in the space. And that uptick is very direct. They're actually siloing or segregating parts of their capital that can only be invested into issues of equity and inclusion and diversity. But a couple more comments on that. I think the conversation about equity and inclusion and diversity is long overdue. It's long overdue in this space. And I've seen a couple of corporate players maybe go about this wrong, issue statements of solidarity, but not really mean real change within their organizations, really look at board staffing composition and what they actually put their money towards. So I think that there's a danger of trying to corporate wash a little bit from, you've seen some of the big American companies, you know, really get dicey on this in the last 3 or 4 months. Some do it well and some do it very poorly. So there's a danger sign there. The last thing that I would say is that in terms of, if I turn to the not-for-profit and charitable sector, I think that a serious crisis presents a serious opportunity. And like James, I think there may be different organizational formats for not-for-profits. There may be collaboration, collusion, even collapsing into each other, you know, and trying ways to work together and really looking at what their value proposition is and how that plays in the current marketplace.
Thanks, Jeff. Sorry, I was furiously writing notes because you guys brought up so many great points and I want to make sure I touch upon them all. But going back to Lori and the question that was presented, and specifically around that word change. So for CIBC, to be clear, this isn't new for us. We're just talking about it more. This sort of support, we have always provided this support within these communities. It looks more responsive because of the way we're talking about it, but we've always been there for these communities. And it's been a part of our core support for a while, and it has been in consultation with these communities, just to make sure that it is meaningful and relevant and that we're working with and not for these communities. We're obviously not perfect, but we do try to strive to, you know, work towards a common goal and something that is meaningful and relevant for them. But it also means checking ourselves at home, being inclusive in the workplace, as Jeff mentioned, and checking our own biases and making sure that, you know, we're putting our money where our mouth is as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Elizabeth. You all kind of touched on something that was another kind of underlying question for me that I didn't ask, but maybe I'll ask it now in case you want to have a chance to go back at it again. But, you know, one of the things that I reflect on is, I mean, so I the question was asked around how does it change what you're doing outwardly, but we all know that for outward change to be really meaningful, it has to be reflective of inward change. And so it's interesting to see how various organizations are responding to this, and your point is well taken, Elizabeth, that for some it's always been a part of the work of your organization, and it's probably been more internally focused, and then how is that showing up externally now? So I just offer everyone an opportunity for a subset question around just, whether you have anything additional that you would want to add around what does that mean for organizations, whether it's your own organization or just maybe what you're thinking about in terms of making that kind of making those kinds of internal changes as well, so that, to Jeff's point, this isn't just been seen, it's not just corporations taking advantage of a situation, if I could put it so bluntly.
I mean, I'll jump in, Lori. I mean, I have the great humble pleasure of being a part of our equity task force at PwC, and we've done a lot of work directly with our Black professionals to unpack the social justice issues around us, and I think there are so many ways to make sure everyone is seen and heard, and that we talk about unconscious bias, and that we look at, naming issues bluntly and making sure everyone feels safe in a culture of inclusion and belonging at our firm. One story I would share in the context of community investment, and likely for those on the call today, we contacted the United Way and asked them about their equity funds and looked for opportunities to work directly with our Black professionals to understand how we could invest or allocate a portion of our firm's contribution to the tune of 10% to Black-led not-for-profits, Black-owned businesses, or other organizations working directly with the Black community that need our support. We'll start first in the GTA and work with United Way organizations across the country to do this and take a leadership role in helping encourage all United Ways to do that. So for any United Ways on the call, I will become knocking on your door and asking you for this information. But that's something I think we can encourage other corporations to do, starting first and with our Black professionals, but also with the many different organizations and spectrums of diversity within our firm and others. I think if we can not only address the ongoing issues inside the business, looking at recruitment and retention, how do we close opportunity gaps, systemic injustice, but also begin to look at practical levers to get investment into the hands that need it most with those communities. It's a place to start, because it's a journey. And I'll say, like Elizabeth said, our firm has a lot of work to do, and we come from a place of humility to make sure we get it right.
I'm waiting to see if Elizabeth's going to jump in before I do.
I'm waiting to see if you're going to jump in.
I'll add a couple of comments, and hopefully everyone finds it helpful. As an Indigenous firm, we do not have things perfect, and we continue to strive. We consider equity and inclusion in our firm as a journey that we seek to accomplish. I mean, we're primarily Indigenous employees, and we're Indigenous owned. But even we need to kind of work harder at making our internal policies really work for the employees in that context. And I had a discussion this morning, so this is pretty timely, about one, COVID. How do we best support employees when we know they're going to work from home? We're bringing on 2 new employees, which I find is pretty exciting, because that's like adding 40% capacity to our firm. How do we best support them at home? What's the best way to do it? The second half of that conversation was, how do we best handle the cultural necessities that go along with that? And we decided not to put a specific policy in place, except to say that, if you need cultural days, you just come and ask. for what it is, and we talk it through on an individual by individual basis, because you can't make a policy specific enough for everybody's culture. And even in an Indigenous firm, we all have different Indigenous cultures and how we practice that. So that, I think, is been an interesting journey for us as an already minority-based organization, still having to do the work. On a broader scale, and James triggered me on this, is, you know, the best way that we have found, and it's partly the reason why we exist, is that if you really want to make strides within minority communities, then the best bet for large corporate infrastructure foundations and others is to have the support go to Black-led, Indigenous-led, and make sure that the capacity goes along with project dollars. Infamous of funding in Canada from government and other places of funding the project, but not the capacity, the core capacity within the organization. And when you do fund the core, you get better delivery anyways of the project. So if someone asks me, and they do all the time, I say, well, find an Indigenous organization to lead it. If you say they don't exist, then you should probably go out and build it or help them build it. And that's the way that you can actually play in the ecosystem. Just a small thought on that one.
That's interesting. I wouldn't mind hearing more about that from Jeff, but just to echo again, something we've all of us have said now is, yes, it is a journey, but you know, it's a journey that while it has obviously done irreparable damage, it has helped us to see gaps in our own funding within our funding focus areas. Just as nationwide, we've witnessed how the most vulnerable populations have suffered in ways that, you know, we might not have imagined had we not had a pandemic. So turning to our own funding focus areas, looking to see where those gaps exist through a COVID lens to see where we can provide that much more support. So for example, I have a colleague who is in a wheelchair, and when the pandemic hit, you know, right away, he had huge issues with his team that would come in to assist him in the mornings. He did not have access to appropriate equipment to remain safe. And as CIBC has a focus on supporting persons with disabilities, especially as it relates to access to employment, this opened up a whole new segment of issues that, you know, we need to make sure we're addressing. We're not just signing checks and making sure that organizations, you know what to do. We're working with them to say, hey, we've identified this on our end. What are you guys doing? What's the most valuable solution to this? Let's partner. Let's work together. And you know, I can appreciate it for that. No one wants to appreciate a pandemic, but at least it has shown us some gaps that we can work on. And should this ever happen again, hopefully we are better prepared as a country, as a community, as an organization.
Great, thanks everybody. Really thoughtful responses from all of you, so thank you very much. We'll go on to what was the planned final question. We'll see where this takes us, but I think in some respects you've all spoken to it in some way. But I do think it's important, especially for an audience, you know, primarily from the social sector, wondering about how are we going to meet the needs of our organization and those that we serve. And so just love for all of you to kind of reflect on and share some perspective on what is the role of community investment funding in the future, knowing that you know, I know certainly we're going to have our own constraints around what we have available for funding. And so, you know, our organization is thinking a lot about how do we perhaps partner with others, collaborate with others to try and be most impactful with what we do have available to contribute. And so it just maybe Jeff, starting with you, and then we can go to Elizabeth and to James. And I sort of deliberately want to start with you as well, Jeff, if it's okay to kind of call you out like this. But in addition to all the things that you do, I know that you are also a part of the same conversation that I'm a part of around how do philanthropic foundations work differently and more collaboratively together in the future, given that we're all facing similar financial constraints, and how are we going to be more effective with what we do invest.
Okay, so I have to parse that many-part question down to its consumable bites here. So I think, I mean, my answer, let's see, let's start with the philanthropic community, which is, you know, a real asset in a time of crisis. And I would, you know, commend many philanthropic organizations for stepping up and tossing their guidelines out the door and moving money on an emergency basis to community-based organizations. So a lot of kudos to a lot of foundations for acting quickly on that. On an ongoing basis and a long-term basis, my experience, and we have foundations who both invest with us, and we also have a foundation of which we do sort of ecosystem work with and engage a lot with the community on that. And I could only really comment from the perspective of Indigenous people in Canada. In my experience is that, you know, there are a lot of foundations, and they tend to have their own investing, granting policies. And although they tend to work in not too disparate issue areas across the spectrum. So a lot of foundations working with youth, and then working with democracy, or working with, you know, anyways, there's a ton of issues, but it's within a band. And my experience has been, it's super exhausting and a little bit resource intensive, both for a recipient organization to chase grants in this space. It's also not particularly focused to do, you know, a bunch of $60,000 grants to an organization with different project reporting, different budgets, you know, and all the relationship capital that you have to use to do that. So from a grantee side of the equation, it would be better if it's more organized in the philanthropic space in Canada. And I think some foundations are getting to that spot. My bias is towards collaborative funding models, where a bunch of philanthropic funders get together, pool their capital, and then really start to fund the things that matter. Not the things that they want to fund, but the things that need to be funded. And these are not always the same in many situations. And I've seen a couple examples where it's worked well. And the more recent one in COVID time has been the Indigenous Peoples Resiliency Fund, which was really led by Indigenous, I'd say, key actors in the ecosystem, and brought together a pool of capital to immediately get what I call micro granting between 5,000 and 30,000 out the door to communities who need it immediately. They made the process easy, accessible. You know, when you can do very simple application process where you don't have to check 100 boxes and do a bunch of things in a short period of time, it's been very successful in my opinion, very, very successful. So funding collaboratives really, and there's been a couple, the Northern Manitoba Food Funding Collaborative, the Arctic Funding Circle, and the On the Land Funding Collaborative in Yellowknife. Both government, philanthropic, and private sector sit there, pool their capital, but have the community make the decisions and really lead it. And that's the key to it, because my belief is that if you're faced with a problem, only those close to the problem really know how to solve the problem. And it gets away from ivory tower thinking that someone in Montreal or Calgary sitting in a big tower knows exactly how to service the needs of the community. It lets the community ideate around it. So again, one of my long-winded responses to a short question. So.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I agree. I think with your last point, making things radically simple, we don't need to have X fund Y that then goes to Z, and then A and B try to figure out where it goes. I think you're right. If we can fund collaboratives, those who are on the ground, those who are doing the work, those who actually know the issues, I think that is definitely a wonderful model for some situations, for sure. But in terms of collaborations, there isn't going to be one model to fix everything, of course. And I do think that a lot of organizations are doing a better job of at least listening now, at least trying to understand how they can support in an authentic way, engaging their stakeholders, working with ESGs, asking the right questions. I think we are getting closer to that, but I think your perspective is definitely really important and accurate for sure.
I mean, I took quite a practical approach to, the managers, the directors, the VPs on the call today at not-for-profits around the need to look at how to adapt organizations for the future. And what I mean by that is, a survey that PwC in consultation with McConnell Foundation has been having, surveying people around, how do you look at how your organization structure changing? How do you invest in skills and capabilities? And what was very interesting is that less than 20% of the survey respondents in that particular survey identified developing people's skills in design thinking, data analytics, problem solving, governance as a priority, and opted to invest in how to use technology or short-term type approaches to the longer-term problems. So beyond investments in organizations that funders are making, I believe this is about a longer-term mind shift across sectors around understanding what skills are required for the future of work and what the pathway looks like to get there, because it's not necessarily about going and taking a new course or training or making large-scale investments in infrastructure, but it's about the way in which we do work and our relationship that I characterize as with technology and with understanding, how to make data-driven decisions. That said, that kind of mindset may help address what Jeff speaks to in terms of, how do we report back on issues with funders, or how do we make the case for more coordinated support across the board, whether you're a not-for-profit leader, running a foundation, or in a major business.
Right. Can I make a follow-up, Lori? You can cut me off at any moment. On James, I 100% agree with James. So there is also within, and I used to run not-for-profit, so I'm pretty familiar with it. There's also a need to really change the modality within which not-for-profits and charities work. And getting a handle on technology, getting a handle on data, and getting a handle, and part of data is the impact narrative that you're building for funders and for yourself. And I think that there's a shift in skill sets that absolutely needs to occur. I mean, that the type of, and this is kind of part of a pandemic response in general, is that we're seeing a whole shift, what would normally be called an industrial shift, but a shift in the skills required to operate in an economy that looks like this now. And that upskilling that's required is actually an opportunity for not-for-profits as well as a necessity for not-for-profits. So just double down on James's comment.
Great, thanks all of you. Before we open it to the floor for questions, to everyone on the call to submit their questions, and that's somewhat a cue or to, if you have questions, please submit them to the questions box. I just want to give the three of you an opportunity. Are there any questions you want to ask of one another, or additional points that you want to pick up on as we're waiting for some questions to start flowing through?
I'm just excited to hear what the audience wants to hear about. It's a great opportunity to hear what's on everyone's mind. Okay, if we want to go there, we do have a question waiting, so we can start there. First question that's come in from someone is a reflection that this is going to be a catastrophically bad year for charities. We need money, and we need it now, or else we may close. We need to know, how can you help? Can you today? So I'm not sure who would like to pick up on that one.
I'm sorry, Lori, do you mind just repeating the last part of that? My mic cut out, or my earphone cut out.
I'll just start from the beginning. This is going to be a catastrophically bad year for charities. We need money and we need it now or else we may close. We need to know, how can you help? Can you today?
I can jump in, and I think I would take a very realistic and pragmatic point of view here, and I'll let that individual know that we'll send out PwC's COVID-19 Navigator, as well as our digital fitness app and some tools and resources that may help. Really, it's about mobilizing, stabilizing, and strategizing for the future of the organization. Now, in hindsight, this probably would have taken place right at the start of the pandemic, but knowing that with complexities around wage subsidies, complexities around health and safety, virtual program delivery, the name of the game right now is continued focus on cash flow and scenario planning, working in consultation with the board of directors around the realities of how work will change, both inside the organization and the work you may do with your clients or the nature of the business. But also, as part of that planning is, if an organization may need to look at a wind down, a merger, an amalgamation, an acquisition, a different kind of business model, how do we plan for the great, the good, or the challenge? And I think being prepared for that can help to relieve anxiety around what if. And that's not to suggest one may be better or the other, but it's to be prepared. So I would say that first. I think second, when we look at cash availability, oftentimes we think about direct funding too from a funder. There may be other vehicles related to debt or related to social finance mechanisms. And I know that's a lot to unpack, but how can we work with boards and management teams to understand what's on the table to access if and when, and what makes financial sense for the organization?
If I can jump in, unless Jeff wants to jump in. Thank you so much for your question. Not sure which charity you're asking from, but I certainly I appreciate your question, and I feel for exactly what you guys are going through. And I think there's a couple of different layers to this kind of question. And support doesn't necessarily have to be financial solely. James was mentioning a couple of different points to consider for sure, but depending on what you're looking for, determining how any one corporation can authentically support you, I think, is a good place to start. So figuring out exactly what you need to do to survive, and then approaching the organizations that support that kind of work. And if that organization isn't in a position to support you financially, maybe you're not within what they focus on for funding, look to their employee base. I mean, CIBC, we have 45,000 employees, and they all come with such unique set of skills. We do have really great skill-based volunteering. We teach financial literacy. We have a marketing team that helps with marketing campaigns, and we're so thrilled to be able to participate in that kind of lens. So I don't know who you are. I wish I could tell you, and I'd look up your grant record and see what's going on, and if we have support and how we can help. But yeah, just continue to prod and look at different ways to get that support, and ask for introductions. A lot of us are really well versed in what the other organizations are doing. As a bank, we also know what our fellow FIs are doing in the space, and maybe we can make that introduction and work together to make sure that you guys survive and thrive.
Yeah, there's not a lot I can add to it. Those are pretty fulsome comments. There's a lot of pain going out there from an organizational perspective, and I hear that and feel it for sure. And I've seen it with some close friends and others who I've worked with and work with now. I echo comments about like a real deep situational analysis. Leaning into some of the volunteer space from large corporate structures, getting help and communicating the situation that you're in to some of the umbrella groups like Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, or Reimagined Canada, the charitable sector. And these are the ones that actually advocate with government for what exact programming is needed. So it also needs to be communicated out exactly what's going on in the ecosystem so people can respond appropriately. I saw the first 6 months of the pandemic was a constant barrage of phone calls. What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Tell us what's happening from government and other folks, so that they can properly tune in what they're doing. fast out there.
I think I'll just add to that as well. Depending on who's already funding you, most corporations right now are being so flexible in their support. So if you find that part of your funding is tied specifically to a program that you just can't operate anymore, it doesn't make sense. I can't guarantee you, but I can almost guarantee you that the organization supporting that program would much rather you survive than that one program continue on if that's not possible. So reach back out, let them know, hey, we really need unrestricted funding right now. We know event revenue is drying up. Like, reach out to us, have that conversation for sure. Just start there.
Thanks, everybody. Jeff, actually, it's a clarifying question and come in for you. Where is it? Oh gosh, they're coming.
They're coming fast now.
Yeah. Let me just see if I can find where. Let me just see if I can find it again. Sorry about that. But there was I can't find it at the moment, so I'll just sorry, just give me a second here. Yeah, here's a follow-up. Do you, in response, an answer that you just gave, do you mean that individuals working at nonprofits need to develop skills to adapt to the shift of how we do work now, or need to fund initiatives that allow people in the community to develop those skills? So a bit of a distinction between.
I actually mean both. I mean, yeah. Internally, there's a shift in skill set that's required that people should be thinking about. How do we operate in this environment if we've got a heavy technology base that needs data, that's work from home? Exactly what does this mean to who we are as an organization? What do we need to build inside to address that? The second part is, for, you know, upskilling, I imagine, is a massive marketplace that, you know, colleges and universities and others are only so good at doing. They're kind of like big ships. They take a while to turn. So I would say that there's opportunity for partnerships there to sort of work on that as an opportunity space.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Thank you for that clarity. A question for all of you. Will your company's funding to charities be going up or down, or stay steady going into 2021?
I can answer for us. Ours will be staying steady.
We're staying steady, and we're looking for new ways to share our talent and our capabilities. So as we talk about upskilling, we know that 83% of leaders in not-for-profits, and this was in PwC's workforce survey, want the opportunity to upskill, reskill, learn something new in their day-to-day roles. So we're keen to look for ways to help people on that journey, whether that be with your boards, your management teams, or your day-to-day. So stay tuned for more.
Yeah, and from our perspective, we don't do a lot of direct funding to charities. We ourselves have a charity that we operate, but what we do is partner and provide sort of expertise in the space about how to think about things like value proposition and organizational structure, the stuff that we've been talking about since the beginning, and doing some market-based analysis, much more with not-for-profits than with charity, to be honest. A few charities in there, but really with a series of not-for-profits, and even looking at what they do and seeing, you know, there's a couple we've worked with recently to say, well, do you know that that's actually, you know, that has there's a capacity to monetize that activity on behalf of, you know, buyers out there in the corporate and other sectors. That thing that you've been providing for free actually has a value. So that's more of the work that we've been doing. We don't fund directly to charities itself.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I'll just offer my own response in there, and I would say we're hopeful that it stays steady. Another question that's come in. How do you all see the role of the private sector in responding to the increase in demand and steep decrease in revenues that charities are facing? is it possible for corporations to increase their investments to support organizations in sustaining through the pandemic? So I think it's a bit of a curl on the last question, but if any of you have anything additional that you would add to that, that would be terrific.
I think it's about reimagining business models. So when we think about not-for-profit sector being nonprofits, charities, social purpose businesses, cooperatives, I mean, there's so many structures out there. What we're hearing a lot from not-for-profit CEOs is that right now is an opportunity to work with your boards around reimagining your mission, how to fulfill that mission in a new world of work, your theory of change, or your simply put, your strategic plan, although we know that will evolve. And there are more agile, more efficient, and effective ways to do work. And we're hearing a lot of success stories from not-for-profits who've reimagined this and actually found significant cost savings. So notwithstanding the obvious revenue gap that Reimagined Canada has identified, the opportunities for not-for-profits to play to win in this market really are thinking differently around the societal need and how to deliver that, one. And I think secondly is, how do we access the myriad of skills and capabilities at corporations? And I think Elizabeth and Jeff spoke to this as well, where it goes beyond the dollars and cents, the capabilities around strengthening skills in cash flow and scenario planning, and understanding how to pivot and be agile, or how to use your CRMs or your Salesforce platforms more efficiently and effectively to reach donors. A lot of it will be zeroing in on the skills and the people you've got, helping them develop to succeed and helping realize greater societal benefit.
I think just to add to that as well, I mean, we have to continue to be equitable though in our giving. We can't prioritize one charity or cause or focus area over another. Everybody needs support right now. So just making sure that, we respond to you, but also remain equitable, and remember that we're affected too. I mean, our CIBC felt the effect of this pandemic. I know most organizations on the call today did as well, and we too have to struggle through, layoffs and defaults on loans, and we're all kind of making our way through this.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add than what was said there, Lori.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, everybody. There was I'll just go to the next question. There was a similar question to the one we just responded to that I'll maybe come back to in a minute, just to make sure that we have kind of addressed anything that might be unique about that one. But with this question, with everything shifting, maybe forever, if not for a few years, how do you propose we can engage with your employees, either through volunteering, donating, when there are opportunities for people to connect with employees?
They're asking the best way to connect with us and our team.
Yeah, so with everything shifting, it's sort of like how, and because there are no in-person opportunities, I guess, do you see opportunities for virtual volunteering, or how are you working to encourage donations from your employees, etc.?
Oh my God, yes, times a million to virtual volunteering. We love employee engagement, and our employees are so engaged, and there are some communities, not Peel, Toronto, or Ottawa, the hotspots, but there are some communities that are still able to distantly get together. But we really advocate for this, and we are so thankful and grateful to all of our important partners who have pivoted during this time to provide the programming that we support in a digital way. And it's opened up. It's so much more accessible to so many more Canadians now who may have never been able to participate in a program that CIBC volunteers for, that now digitally they can participate in. So we're very much open to digital volunteering, definitely. And employee giving, CIBC just had a matching campaign where we encouraged our donations to, or encouraged our employees to give, and we would be matching it. And then we also provide it's called CIBC Reward Dollars for individuals who support in kind. So if you take the time to drop off some food at a food bank, we reward you for that because that is just phenomenal. And then we encourage you to donate those CIBC rewards back to the charity. So many creative and unique ways that are coming through right now to encourage employee giving and volunteering. So yes to digital volunteering for sure.
Thank you.
Those are fantastic programs. I'd add that, that PwC, our asset is our people. It's our greatest asset, and we're so proud of the amazing work that these change makers are doing in the community all the time. We've made a pledge as a company to upskill 1 million people in not-for-profits through our New World, New Skills agenda. Talked a little bit about that today. One of the key pillars is to get a ton of PwCers on not-for-profit and charitable boards. So if you're a charity or an NPO, you need a finance leader, a CPA, you need a smart PwCer, please share that posting with us and we'll post it to our internal NPO board directorship job board to share it. People are interested and they want to be able to give. And I think by doing that, you can have some skills and capabilities. You can win the hearts and minds of those leaders to then share with others. And I think it builds that continuum of giving along what that question is looking for.
Yeah, we are, without a doubt, the smallest organization on this call with a very limited staff base, and we're volunteered all over the place, I think. All of our small number of employees. Where we do provide assistance is we really focus on the Indigenous communities, both urban and rural and on-reserve, off-reserve. And as they approach us, really act in a navigating role with communities, with businesses, with not-for-profits, with charities in the space. Say, this is where you need to go to do that. This is where you need to go to that. And if you need help on something specific that we can execute on really quickly, then we do that. Otherwise, and some of them, James, have come forward looking for new board members too, which is harder to get now that people's time's a little bit more squished, I think, in trying to keep things going. So I might reach out to you for a couple of boards that I know, in fact, that might be looking.
Us too.
All right, team effort.
Terrific, thanks everybody. And there are quite a few more questions that are coming in now, so and very thoughtful ones. So let's see, are corporations conducting stricter analysis of grantees' financial viability and avoiding making emergency investments in organizations at greater risk of folding?
That's a great question. I'm going to say no. I think all charities are at a certain amount of risk right now, so we are taking that into account with every single charitable ask. But no, we're not examining your annual reports or what your current spend is. No, we want to work with you to make sure that you can continue to do the important work that you do in the community.
Yeah, from our perspective, the foundations that we've worked with and the organizations doing applications, we've actually seen a bit of the opposite. We've seen a loosening of sort of the strict requirements and a bit more of a, okay, we've got a problem to solve in the ecosystem here, and let's just be a little bit kinder in terms of how we do these things. So we've seen the opposite direction.
I just to add to that too, I think it really helps how you explain it too. If you make a request and you say, you know what, I'm going to be honest, we need half of that to go to unrestricted, or this program won't work. We really appreciate that transparency, and that helps us to better understand what you're doing. So no less funding, but greater transparency for sure.
James, was that 2 thumbs up, just a 2 thumbs up for the responses, or did you have anything to add?
That was, I don't need more airtime, so 2 thumbs up to all of you.
Thanks, James. Next question. The pandemic has amplified a sector that was already unstable. The future will require more collaboration and coming together. How can funders support this?
I would say it's a lot of it's about grassroots coalition building. So in some of the conversations we've been having with leaders across the country is that you know, the many issues around us today require different kinds of solutions led by community at large and with different perspectives and diverse perspectives that haven't necessarily been brought to the table, which I think is a really important observation. So I think when you come as a group or a coalition of organizations addressing an issue that really matters now, it's a very compelling conversation to have around investment. So what this isn't is traditional funding, but it really is investing for the future of Canada. It's based on values, it's based on economic need or societal need. And I wonder if some of those kinds of requests will bubble to the top in terms of being really easy examples to fund or invest in, because they provide practical solutions to what matters most right now.
Yeah, if I can jump in, Elizabeth. I have two perspectives. One where I share with James is COVID has revealed fractures in society that ran deeper than we thought. And it also revealed weaknesses of certain business models. And now I think we all have to grapple with that within the private, public, and philanthropic sector, for that matter. So I think that there's a need to this hard look at and an opportunity to do something about it amongst grassroots organizations, which I agree with. The other thing is there's a deep need to build community-based resiliency so that not-for-profits, charitable, and other organizations, including corporations, need to think about long-term community resiliency and what does that mean? Because we've just exposed a bunch of the weakness. And now I'm going to play the hard side of the economics for a second. I don't think that we have reached the peak of that. I think that largely the government investment that's occurred has shored up certain asset classes in the market and has put things in, has delayed some of the inevitable economic consequences that may come down the road in 8 to 9, 12 months from now, where we're going to see exactly what a eviscerated retail and tourism sector looks like and where did all those jobs go. And I recently had a friend very close to me who was a long-term senior restaurant manager who was let go, came back, underserved, was let go again, and now will not come back. As a 50-year-old person, the upskilling problem is pretty extreme. So there's just this need to really rethink our models around how we're going to do things. And I do think it provides a bit of an opportunity in that space for organizations to get together. And I think largely there's going to be some restructuring around not-for-profits and collaborations and partnerships and looking at the broader aspects of society where they can play a role and do the things that governments who are funders and foundations and others and corporations are interested in this space.
Thanks. Elizabeth, I assume that 2 thumbs up were in
Yeah,
agreement.
no, I echo them. 2 thumbs up on it.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Given the focus that COVID-19 has brought to light and demand for community investment funding in health issue, mental health, social equity, how do you see support for arts and culture organizations evolving in the near and distant future?
I can answer. Arts and culture isn't a focus for CIBC, though we do support some organizations. But you know, we continue to look to them for. I'm constantly amazed by how these large organizations are pivoting their events. We know that event revenue is drying up, and film festivals where their festival is their bread and butter and the key source of revenue, and for those to not be able to happen because you can't have X number of people in a theater, you know, it's been really wonderful to see how creative some of these organizations are getting in order to put on the event or put on the show. And I'm continue to be amazed. Our employees continue to be amazed. Although it's not a funding focus for us, we do have employees actively involved in that space. And so just continuing to allow us to authentically support where we can and show us what you got, because it's been really great, and it's allowed me to attend some events that I probably never would have that are happening across the country. So.
The only thing I'd add is, I think we're at a difficult point in this particular crisis where when we think about arts and cultural organizations being critical to the social fabric of this country, we haven't necessarily talked about that subsector within the not-for-profit community as being a priority first compared to others. So I think it's a very important conversation to have around, as society becomes resilient through the current pandemic, what happens in a new normal if there isn't arts and culture? And I wonder if that's an interesting conversation, perhaps for the next not-for-profits at too, because that one I don't think has been highlighted as much as it could.
Yeah, I agree with that comment. It's, culture, art and culture reflect the society and provide commentary on the society we live in and also the society that we want to live in. And that question, the society that we want to live in, I hear this all the time about building back better. And I kind of query that a bit about what better really means. And I really hope that means more equitable. But I struggle with, exactly what that'll mean. And arts and culture organizations and that component of society really is the guiding light. I mean, we're a strange organization. We do culture in everything we do. We open with ceremony, we close with ceremony. It becomes part of our practice about how we look at impact even. So I think culture is in and all around us, and we need to value it more. So I think the discussion about how to do that in a recovery or a re-emergent economy is an important conversation to have.
Great, thanks. Our next question with a shout out, a thanks. Hi friends, thank you for such a great presentation. This is Lindsay from Skipping Stone. I'm curious to know what folks think about a charity or nonprofit taking advantage of the bank loans that are available in bridging cash flow deficit until we hear back from grants that have been submitted.
Who wants to go?
I'd say that's a great question to bring up with your board treasurer and with your finance leader in the organization to look at the specific nature of your finances and make sure you don't over leverage yourself and put a big bet where you're indebting your balance sheet. But I would say there are many financial instruments to explore in a financially pragmatic and thoughtful way, reducing your risk as much as possible. So I will be crisp in my vagueness, not knowing your financial position, but remember, make good, smart financial choices based on what's best for your business with the right financial people in the room.
Yeah, I think to take advantage of it, but to echo James' point, I don't know enough about the specific situation, but I think if you have that solution and you've spoken to your financial advisor and they've given you appropriate and relevant help for yourselves as a charity in a pandemic, then yeah, absolutely take advantage of that and continue to take advantage of all the products and services that your financial institution is offering right now and advice for sure.
Yeah, I agree with both comments. I think I have no issue with the thought of organizations taking on the debt as long as they've done a pretty solid analysis of their current financial risk situation and the approval, of course, of their boards, but also projecting out what that means if, to be careful of the short-term band-aid unless you're pretty sure of the long-term heal on that. So yeah, it's a bit of a risk assessment by organization.
Great. Thanks everyone. So we have about 3 questions left and about 7 minutes to go before I give it back to Karen to wrap things up. So it would be game changing for nonprofits to be able to apply for funding based on their past record of success instead of inventing new projects just to bring dollars in. Will you be planning to offer more low barrier operational funding rather than project funding in the future?
I always say it's in the eye. So 3 years ago, PwC invested in what we called our Young People Project. We invested almost $1 million in organizations that addressed youth unemployment, fully unrestricted funding. I think the issue here is we make the assumption that funders need to see programmatic funding, yet as a grant writer, we can create any kind of proposal we want. So it's in the nuances of how you work with your finance team around how you want to invest in unrestricted or restricted funding, but sometimes we can be our own worst enemies in terms of restricting ourselves. So perhaps it's a challenge to all of us as we're thinking about how we characterize the monies we need and how we characterize how it needs to fit on a balance sheet or not, because it's about trust. And if we trust the organizations to steward the assets that we've got to make the difference in the first place. So some food for thought.
I think with that type of question, I think it's really important to have that conversation with the potential funder too. We definitely have unrestricted funding for our existing partners for sure. We reached out to everyone at the beginning of the pandemic to say, you know what, this is unrestricted. You also don't need to report on this right now. None of these things are as important as your survival. But now that we've kind of settled in, and unfortunately we are hitting a second wave, but a bit more settled into what's happening, to have that conversation. Like sometimes it's hard to get everything out in a grant. Like reading a grant, I've read thousands of grants. It's better to, we always prefer having a conversation on the phone, face to face if we can, just to really understand what you're hoping to support and how we can really help you get where you want to go. So I'm going to say yes, but like, let's have that conversation first and really make sure that we're supporting exactly what you need and helping you get there.
I'll reserve comment. We had a couple more questions in the last couple of minutes.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, the last two, I mean, these have all been really terrific questions. A couple of really juicy ones left. So funders typically have the resources, skills, and foresight to talk about mindset shifts, future-focused skills, systemic solutions, and organizational reorganizing. Crisis funding aside, how do we realistically support this shift to a systemic, solutions-focused pathway to the future? This is a huge ship to steer. And this in itself is probably the focus of a whole other panel discussion, yeah. So it's
yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I'd say it involves three things. What's in a shift in mindset, both at a board level, empowering the management team. So if your board isn't up to speed on how an organization become more agile and evolve and the investments that they're supporting leadership and making in its people, that's where a good starting point is. From a management team perspective, CEO right down to middle management to the person who started yesterday at the not-for-profit, a commitment to a learning journey and a learning culture to understand what skills you've got today and what skills you need to succeed in the future will better enable you as a professional, but also to be innovative within your own organization and find different kinds of solutions you hadn't thought about. And that's where the relationship to technology comes in. Then there's the funding component, and could it be a commitment around a percentage of funding being earmarked to digital transformation or capability transformation within an organization? We're not talking traditional funding and training and professional development. We're talking about creating time and space to think differently.
Yeah, I think maybe I'd come at it, or maybe I'm understanding the question differently, and I'm probably wrong, but I'm going to go at it anyways, is that it seems to me that that question comes from a funder perspective. If you want to encourage systems change in a certain area, how do you best work with grantee organizations to do that? My experience is that funders need to be really good about the theory of change they're trying to create, the systems that are the levers of that theory of change. And my encouragement would be to work collaboratively with the organizations you want to fund to build it together. It's way more robust if it's built together. We are doing a social finance project on type 2 diabetes reduction, which has huge implications in a COVID world because it's a extremely prevalent comorbidity with COVID. But in that, our model was to bring 34 players to, we call it a lab table. And that includes funders, that includes community members who are, in this case, Indigenous community members, recipient organizations or social enterprises that are in play, and some of the big organizations and medical professionals who work at the community level to say, okay, so we're talking about the stickiest and wickedest of health issues, type 2 diabetes, of which we've had no luck as an epidemic. So if we want to affect systems change, what are the levers we need to pull on to do that? So, I mean, I may be way off topic here, but my strong instinct is to co-create those things with the organizations that you want to work with. It just works better. It takes a little bit longer, but I find a lot of foundations and others who play in this space, even government agencies in our case, have come in and willing to take the time now, especially when it's a big, wicked problem that you're trying to solve.
Thanks, Jeff. Elizabeth, anything to add?
No, I think I understood the question differently, but in the interest of time, maybe we can move on.
I was probably wrong. That's okay.
There are no wrong answers here. Okay, and Karen, I hope you don't mind, I can't see you, but if I can take one more minute from you. I'm not quite sure how you all are going to answer this in the most succinct way possible. I don't know if it's if you could give me 1 or 2 words around what you're thinking about the We charity issue, and whether you feel it will have, or fear that what kind of impact it might have on the sector. So the question is, nice to see you all, and what impacts do you feel or fear the We charity issues will have on both the operations and funding of the sector? So like I said, it's another big juicy one. So if in 1 or 2 words you want to share how you feel, and we'll maybe close it out there.
I can give 2 words.
Yeah, I can't speak to the specifics of the scandal, but what I can say is the impact of that conversation on trust within the charitable sector, and that's underpinned by Edelman's Trust Barometer, I think is a clear indication of where the public perception is.
Thank you, James.
I would just add to that the need for increased governance on these types of partnerships as well.
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally ramped up what may not always be appropriate due diligence to a new extreme on charitable organizations, at least receiving government funding.
Right. Thank you all. It's been a delight to be in a conversation with you, and we've got through all the questions, and I hope that we were able to offer something of value to everyone who's called in. I will turn it back to you.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks, panelists. Oh, wow, for all your candid discussion and your answers to the questions. Great questions, too. My big takeaway was that we should value culture more. So it's, I'm kidding. There were tons of takeaways, but I think in general, it's a great reminder to consider the number of supports that you referenced over the session today to provide to the nonprofit sector. Of course, investment, but well beyond that into skills-based volunteering, upskilling, tools to assist with emergency planning and response, and many, many others, as well as your considered strategic approach to working with us as partners and the sector to build strong and resilient communities. We're so happy to have you in our community. I appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. I look forward to hearing more from our community around this topic as we move forward. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, CIBC, and to our supporters, the Matart Foundation, PwC Canada, Suncor Energy Foundation, and our media partner, Post Media. There they are. As we've heard today, our future prosperity is built through strategies that involve commitments from multiple sectors, and CCBO has put together a list of working recommendations to build Alberta's community prosperity, and we want to hear from you about which recommendations would be most impactful for your organization's recovery. So we look forward to engaging with you. Please visit the link below to get involved in that conversation. And finally, the fall continues to be busy for CCVO as we present great webinars and gatherings such as the one today. Join us tomorrow for our next CCVO webinar, From Barely Surviving to Thriving, a timely look at how to tackle mental health pressures in work for yourself and for your employees. Registration is open on our website and at the link here. Thank you to everyone for attending today, to our moderator, Lori Hewson, and panelists, and our presenting sponsor, CIBC, and supporters, and to the CCVO staff who worked very hard to put this event together. Please take a moment to complete the short survey that you'll see pop up after the meeting ends. In case you don't get a chance to share your feedback today, we'll also include the survey and some links to assist you in continuing to engage in the discussion around community investment in a follow-up email. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, stay warm, and I hope you can join us again soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. I think we're done.